Hi. Okay, hello. A room full of people who want to talk about ethics in XR. They actually care. This is both unprecedented and incredibly exciting. One of our objectives in even doing this panel in the first place is to try to make connections between people who are thinking about these issues for the application of XR, which we are all so excited about. We are all long-term evangelists for these technologies, but we also have serious questions about what it means when reality customizing technologies start to become mainstream for the people who can afford such technologies. So I'm going to play a video. Now, this is not an endorsement of any particular brand. I think it's just an example of showing us what is now possible out on the streets in terms of augmented reality, mixed reality, spatial computing. I don't lose a lot of sleep over the difference between those terms. We can use whichever terms make you comfortable. But augmented reality is happening now. Now, it's currently happening in pass-through headsets, but I think we can all see with confidence that true see-through augmented reality is just a few years away. And this means that suddenly real places, real neighborhoods can become spaces of digital play. Literally 4 years ago this week, John Hanke, the CEO of Niantic, said in an interview that he thinks that if you choose to theme the world like it's Nintendo everywhere, that's what you choose to live within, that's the world that you choose to live within, then that should be your right. That should be your right as a consumer. And by extension, perhaps, that companies should have the right to be able to sell you those kinds of realities. But we also have serious questions about what starts to happen to human bodies which can be augmented, because these technologies are live and they are in the field at the moment. This is an application for Quest 3 called Descartes XR. Appropriately enough, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. In this case, this is a hallucination headset format which allows you to detect and dynamically reskin the bodies of other people in real time using AI from nothing more than a text prompt. And again, this is real. I showed it to a group of students 2 weeks ago, and they immediately had a lot of questions about what starts happening when you're out on the street, seeing through glasses like these, seeing the bodies of other people, and developing the capacity to reskin those bodies in whatever way suits you within the privacy of your headset without those people's consent, not necessarily even with those people's knowledge, because augmented reality operates on the physical surfaces of reality. So if you're reskinning a building or a person, there's no inherent way for that person to be notified that that is happening to them. And so formats like this, which are advertising themselves as AI reality reskinners, they start to raise potentially very dystopian questions. Now, we're going to have a very wide-ranging conversation today because I'm really honored to be on a panel with such a distinguished group. We're bringing very different perspectives to these issues generally. But I want to start with this provocation about what happens to human bodies, what happens to human identity, because I think that's a leading edge of where there is a potential for harms to be done with this technology. And I think that's why we need to forge connections across these groups and to have these conversations now about what happens when reality becomes customizable. Stick around at the end if you're really interested in engaging with these questions. We have literally just today spun up a Discord group, a Discord server, which if you would like to join it, that's kind of a holding place for people who want to put their contact details in, because next year we're going to be trying to get people together to have these conversations and to make some momentum behind getting stuff done around the potential for harm. That's quite enough out of me for now. I want to introduce my amazing panel. Alina, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi guys. I keep it brief. I'm Alina. I'm a research associate at University of Applied Sciences Mittweida in the Virtual Technologies Department. But apart from that, active in wearing many hats with organizations, initiative like XRSI Europe, team is here, the Safe Zone EV, and other initiatives like Open Air Cloud Europe and stuff. But yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Linda Ritchie Jacobs. I am American, obviously, but moved to Europe last year and have European roots. I do business strategy in emerging tech sectors. I've focused on XR the last few years because I absolutely love it. And I represent the filthy commercial aspect of life. This is me. I'm filthy lucre.
Well, my name is Nastasia Sejiva from University of Luxembourg, and I'm working in the intersection of cybersecurity and usable HCI, human-computer interaction questions. But here today, I will talk mostly about industrial component and about things we found working on a XR project for industrial off-highway machinery called Theia XR. So here I will take my industrial look on the ethical aspects of XR.
Cool, and I'm Rob. I'm a XR narrative designer and experience designer. I wrote various VR games and augmented reality games, and I now work across immersive theater and theme parks as well. So I want to start off with a provocation and a question to everybody. Earlier in the year, there was a big controversy over new AI formats' capacity to recreate the Studio Ghibli animation style, that aesthetic, right? It's a beautiful and kind of comforting and homey aesthetic style. Now, during the immigration protests that happened in LA earlier this year, groups of protesters were taking pictures of themselves and then running them through that Ghibli filter in order to present themselves or be presented by others in a way that presented them as kind of comforting, as heroic, as wholesome, the way that the Ghibli aesthetic does. But then there were other actors at play taking those very same photographs and running them through different AI filters to depict those same people in ways that made them seem much more threatening, depicting them in more orc-like or demonic aspects. So the question that I have for the panel to kick us off is, what happens if XR technology allows people to live in really different versions of reality even more than they already do?
I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, to be honest, your mind's the limit, right? I mean, it would be cool, right?
It's going to be cool.
Being in Studio Ghibli, who doesn't love Totoro? I love it. I love it to bits, but there's the fact that if we're not having boundaries like we have here on how to, when it comes to human rights, right? How to interact with each other. We need the same frameworks in a digital environment. And if there aren't limits, how far do you want to go? It starts with a filter, but then what around you're altering the physical environment. We are at the same physical space, but perceiving reality differently. But also, does it end there in reskinning? But what is of erasing? Like we currently do. When we walk down the streets, there are homeless people. What about erasing them? What about bystanders? If somebody literally erases me by, literally without my knowledge, having a camouflage that I'm purely not existing anymore. So it's a philosophical question, but if there aren't any limits, where does it end?
Linda. Oh, no. Yeah, honestly.
I've actually been mulling about this subject for a long time. I think it's a really interesting one. The intersection of XR and AI has obviously been coming for a number of years, even though it hasn't been in the popular let's talk about it so much. AI-driven XR interaction. One of my very favorite slides was from a few years ago where I just said, what is it if you're sitting on the metro and you just want to be in a sea monkey kind of a day, and I had a slide with everybody look like a sea monkey, and I just love that. I think the appeal is obvious, right? We're all going to want to share our fandom on a daily basis. I'm in my case, Star Trek mood today. I'm always in a Star Trek mood, by the way, but okay. In one day, and I go, I want to see the world the way I want to see it, and I think that is the road to potentially hell with everybody, because the appeal is so strong that you can paint the world the way you see it. From an ethical perspective, I think it's very difficult for people to create relationships if their point of view is the only one they see, and all of a sudden you interact with everybody around you in a certain way because that's the way you are perceiving them. And as we increasingly have social media and other ways that we are moving towards a very egocentric world, this is another way, another step for it. So for me, what's worrisome about it is that people will lose themselves, and they will also lose the ability to interact and relate to other people.
Yes, I fully agree with my colleagues here, but what I'm also starting to think, then I try to put this industrial perspective also here, is that I'm happy when the people have the choices, as long as it's free choices. But if it's thinking about real life and real situations, how much of really free choices people doing? And for example, if you're thinking of a situation that we have asymmetry of power, or asymmetry to making a choice, for example, then we have this balance between employee and employer, or if we have an imbalance between kids and adults. So I'm worried that this freedom of have the world the way you like to have can in some moment become see the world the way other person want you to see. And it may be a soft power or strong power, because, well, in companies we have dress code, corporative dress code. What could stop us to have this corporative view of the certain things? And that's make for me situation a bit more difficult than just a free choice, which questionable.
Yeah, I agree. I think we talked about this in the pre-talk, which is the increasingly AI, knows everything about us and can steer conversations to a certain direction or not. And the XR experience is so personal because you're seeing things, right? You're inside it, even though you're out in the world. It's your experience. That the ability for the AI to potentially also push you towards a certain experience or certain mindset is obviously magnified with XR on top of it.
And also, could we then end up in these sort of echo chambers where we have no escape out of it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think we've already seen in real time, you can devil's advocate and say, well, what we're talking about is nothing new, because people already can filter news and choose to live within a perceptual bubble of news which they agree with, for example. But I think we've seen more and more that, the explosion of the internet and the mobile internet has resulted in echo chambers where people are able to become radicalized very rapidly on the internet, purely through feeds of social media information, purely through flat screen information. Whereas what we're talking about are being able to live within a pervasive reality layer which makes reality look a certain way. And even in just early versions of that, even just user interface formats, like just text and adding cursors and graphics to reality, rather than the full body reskinning that we just showed. Those could very, very quickly have political impacts, like the Meta Ray-Bans, the ones that don't even have the displays. There were 2 Harvard students who managed to hack them to dox people on site using a facial recognition script. So then, very quickly you move from that to being able to display someone's likely, for example, likely voting choice above their head as you walk past them on the street. And I think you're right, that then the way in which we relate to other people becomes incredibly complicated. So, next question, is there a difference between doing this with graphics that exist purely inside a headset and having the freedom inside our own minds to imagine or think whatever we want about people? If you're sat on the subway and you're looking at somebody opposite and you're imagining them as an orc and having, having an imaginative experience, is there a difference between that and a headset doing it for you?
I admire your sense of visualization if you can do it that well.
I mean, there's a thing of this sort of active notion of doing, where you think, right? So it's also, where does the harm start? Does it start with the thought? Because then I would argue we even more doomed with BCI. So welcome to that world, I mean, where the right of your own thoughts, it's currently not covered by human rights, period. So, I mean, then we should already sort of stop this discussion, because...
Yeah, human-computer interfaces are going to add a complicating factor into this.
Yeah, so from psychological point, I would probably add, I'll go into slightly back to original question. Yes, there is a difference here, because when you have imagination, they have some properties of imagination, so it basically is coming and going. It's very difficult to focus it all the time, maybe have this constant imaging or constant graphical representation of something. I mean, it's really difficult. Some people can do that, most of us can't. And if you have these glasses, which really constantly oriented you toward this predefined model, it definitely will have more long-lasting effect on your representation, your thinking about these people, about your background, understanding of the situation. So even if you know you're implemented yourself, in some moment, I'm afraid it will start to backfiring you, so you can't easily take it out of your imagination. In this case, of course, it's much more risky situation than just thinking about it one moment and thinking about something else in another moment.
I think for me, the difference is, my dad was a psychiatrist, so for me, this sounds like schizophrenia at a point where you're in another world so deeply and interacting with it that you can't tell the difference anymore. But that aside, for me, the difference is the AI part. You're actually having a conversation with an external voice, not an internal one like my dad would treat. And that is where it becomes different, because you are not entirely sure what the purpose or goal or intent of that AI is. And while the visual experience, I wish I could visualize that well, Robin, walk around and see people all the time, but maybe some people can. But for me, the interaction part is the part that changes the AI, which is tailored to you and knows exactly who you are and can build on every interaction and knowledge. The BCI part is interesting. We're not there with that technology yet, but it's coming. I was at CES in 2020. I was playing mind games with other people there, like with BCI, and it's already come so far since then that I think we're going to be in our own, even more in our own worlds. And while that in and of itself is not necessarily bad, you could argue, I think it's the manipulation potential that is the scary part.
The one aspect that I also maybe like that we shifted, because we are also currently only focusing on one pure sense, where we as humans perceive our surrounding with all our senses. So I would argue it's not just only the visual aspect, but it's also the biometric data aspect as well. Sweat, emotions, heartbeat, and all that as a collective tend to then really where I would say majority of our communication is nonverbal. Yeah. So, and that also adds another layer to it. So we are coming closer of seeing is believing.
And experiencing will be believing at that point, because if the BCI information, the biometric data is fed in with the AI in conjunction to control and not necessarily, I mean, this sounds so dystopian when we talk about only control, but interact with you in a way that will manipulate you. God, that's also negative. But.
Well, let's talk about control then. So Anastasia made the really good point that we're sort of stuck between two possibilities, two extremes. So there could be a very kind of top-down, very controlled reality that is in effect imposed on you by your workplace, by your boss. We already know that there are Amazon glasses that are designed to be worn by delivery people that then provide an interface that makes their jobs easier, but could very easily move forward into the kind of almost gamified productivity setups that you see in Amazon warehouses. And taken further, if you live in an absolutist political environment, it's easy to imagine having a version of reality that's imposed on you downwards by a state, for example. Whether that's reskinning people or things around you in the way that we've just seen, or simply, displaying people's, statistics above their head. Would that be better and safer to have a top-down control of reality, or a completely wild west of unregulated, open source, home-brewed versions of reality that are completely impenetrable and non-interoperable with one another? Again, which dystopia do you want to choose?
You mean which pill?
Well, maybe the more productive question is, if those extremes are in any way realistic, how do we find a middle ground between them? Because this technology is coming, right?
I think I'm not usually a legislation person, but in this case, I kind of am, because I think that there needs to be some sort of rules and regulations around what can be done with our data across the board. And ideally, it would be a global one, which is really pie in the sky, to get countries and regions to agree so that when you travel, that whole which data is gathered and what's done with it and who uses it is a little standardized. Because I personally think government should be there to serve the people, but how old-fashioned. But I think the thing is, being the filthy lucre person here, but for me, I've long been perplexed that the entertainment companies haven't yet come up with a version of their entertainment that you can immerse yourself in without a headset, like as an AR overlay or something, and actually be inside the entertainment. I think what's going to happen is just like what happened to all the technologies. Initially, it's massively fragmented, and everybody has their camp. You're an Android or a Google person, or you're an Android or an Apple person, or you're this or you're that, because everybody wants to recoup their R&D costs and all that. But ultimately, as we're seeing now, things start to merge and there becomes the large entities that they are. So ideally, I would personally love to see some sort of legislation that actually thinks about this. But all the companies are, they're the ones spending the money, and they're moving really quickly and far quicker than the legislation. I don't know if that answers your question, Rob.
I mean, we're going to do time for questions, but yeah, go on. No, I'm interested.
We can open up.
So, very good points. Existential risks, very things we should all be conscious of looking at. 100% of the conversation so far has been Black Mirror dystopian realities. What
they have good
if this could
advisors.
actually make the life better? What if I could foreground the most beautiful things, the most generous things in my daily life? What if I could actually foreground those micro experiences that are making my day and myself more human and more who I want to be, more who I want to become and value as a person? So I'd like to see a conversation for each one of you, beyond the orcas, of course, but with the imagination of projecting forward, what would a white mirror situation look like if I had technology that actually made me into my best self? What would you see? What would you see as possibilities that are real, without going Pollyanna, without going too far into the future? But
I would like to see everybody own their own data. I would like everybody to have their own data and be able to partition it out and permission it out based on their experience that they set up the rules for.
I mean,
I love the beautiful experiences. So I don't think we're trying to be Black Mirror. It is a scary subject.
maybe it's our European sort of origin, where actually, and we've been having this discussion because we are close friends, and our private discussions are even more dark. And but they get us moving because we get stuff done. I mean, we just finished a project where we got out the first universal code of conduct for XR and spatial computing. So it's out, so we need to adopt this. We done a legal gap analysis showcasing that current legislation, so talking about here industry over-regulation, but apparently there's also a huge gray area when it comes to legislation. And also challenging the AI Act, because there are novelty risks that emerge. So maybe I'm too European for this, but the dark gets me going to actually create a better future. Because apparently, moving from Web 2, we as a species have the opportunity to start from a blank piece of paper, but we're not. We're taking the baggage from Web 2 era and spatially applying it. And there are novelty risks emerging. So me personally, I'm sorry to answer your question. My motivation is the dark one. Sorry, I have no positive answer, because that's my motivation.
Yeah, so from my side, I mean, come on, I'm from cybersecurity, so no good people here.
Even more dark.
Yeah, but I think, honestly, I don't think that thinking about existential risks or different kinds of risks are necessarily leads to, let's say, understanding things as dystopian. So I think in all the paradigm of the defense of the things is exactly try to find the worst scenario, try to see what's the risk on this worst scenario, and keep it as in a drawer, basically, yes, not to take in real life. So for me, for example, I think we are quite good in the moment. We have different stages in development of technology. So now we're still in a very divergent stage. So a lot of technologies, a lot of regulations, a lot of interactions. And actually the things, yes, Alina doing for her project and we're doing in our project, try to find the best experiences and try to what could be the right way to go through that. We're not in convergence yet. So I think in a nice, lovely, slightly wildish West, answering to your question, we are now. And it's a good point to start to doing something around it, keeping best scenarios in mind, just as a precaution.
I just try to advise clients and to try to make sure they know the negative too.
I started asking these questions because I'm an XR narrative person. I was writing a book about it. And I started thinking, okay, these techniques that I'm teaching people about good storytelling for augmented reality, this is going to also be used by people to create very effective advertising, because that's part of storytelling. And I'm excited to see those adverts. I'm excited to see the explosion of creativity that is absolutely going to happen within these formats. And as a narrative person, I'm so excited to see the ways in which new artists and young artists work out ways to build empathy with these tools, because that's what good narrative does. But I would say that what I keep coming back to is that I think it's going to be both. As Anastasia said, like, I think we're going to see a lot of incredible new hybrid art forms that are part real and partly have one foot in the virtual. But I do think that also people are going to get hurt. And I think it's likely to be young and already marginalized people in the first instance who experience this, because the promise of augmented reality is to leave each other notes in the margins of reality, but it also could easily result in people being marginalized out of their own realities because they can be erased, for example. It's very hard to think of accountability systems because what we're talking about is not ultimately data necessarily. Like, it's been hard enough to legislate keeping rights over one's own data. But actually what we're talking about are the physical surfaces of your body, because if you are the owner-operator of a human body and you take it out in public, it is available for other people to reskin. And unfortunately, to give a very provocative example, if someone, and you know for sure that this is going to happen, if someone develops a homebrew reskinning system like the ones we've just seen to make people look like they're wearing bikinis, and they walk down the street, some of the people who they are reskinning in that way are going to be minors.
Wearing anything?
Well, and if you're doing that to me, there is no inherent system of me being notified that that's being done to me. And I might object if you make me look like one of those Koopa Troopers from Super Mario. I could reasonably have an objection. And so moving on from this, because we want to create time for discussion around this, I want to ask everybody.
I wanted to mention that Denmark is the only country right now that protects human assets.
And I think AI has raised this question, right? How much right do we have over our own appearance in terms of it being appropriated by others? But I mean, how much right do we have over what the clothes that we chose to put on today being the clothes that other people see us in? So, question for the panel, do we have the right to see the world the way we want? And do we have the right to be seen by other people the way we choose?
Yes and no. Because there's not a yes and no answer yet.
I think you're right, but how do we get there?
The thing is, if you currently look at legislation on how it's been approached, it's looking or it's been addressed as technology in isolation, where in production processes, it's already converging. So this is one factor that we need to address and nag, that it's the convergence. So it's not just the visualization, it's every layer of it. And then also, we are not dealing with static technologies. So also, linear legislation doesn't apply to it fully, because you have context-based, and then also adding the time layer on top, whereas the physical world is constantly moving and changing, so does these technologies. So I might place something, it might evolve over time. And this is also a layer that is not yet fully making use of yet, but it will as well. So it's just a matter of asking and erasing this question, because we're still super early. We're not mass market. A lot of people, we are in our own bubble. A lot of people haven't even experienced these technology yet. Yeah. And it's just a matter of time and raising this question, so we are equipped, because we are at the cusp. We are leaving the 2D screens.
I remember when I saw the first Avatar movie, and it was in IMAX, and it was as immersive as it can get without an actual headset on, and it was so colorful and so exciting. And I got home, and I was depressed as hell for 2 days, because my world is so gray and boring in comparison. The appeal of this is massive. So do we have a right to live in our own, whatever you said? We already do to an extent. I think that would be the devil's argument here, is that we all have our own lens and we see it the way we want to anyway. But I think that it is limited by the other people. So if we eliminate the barrier to the other people because we can put what we want on them, then I think the fracturing of society, God, now I'm doing Black Mirror again, can't help it. They had great advisors, is real. So I don't know what I just answered you or not. But.
Well, I think it's really two different questions inside of this one big, beautiful question. So do we have a right that other people see us as we want to? Definitely yes, and I think we're still doing, well, we're already doing that. Yes, we're taking the clothes, we like to have our makeup, we like to have the makeup and so on and so forth. So we have this, what we wanted to show, and if we add something additional to that and other people can see what I want you to see, why not? I mean, it's a good thing. Can we have the same rights to see other people the way we want them to see? I doubt. I don't know what is exactly the main problem here, as long as other people don't know it. Maybe it's only behavioral and consequential things. So can I predict that the way people deliberately see me, then affect the actions they take over me after that? And if yes, I can say yes, it's really potential risk, for example. But again, if we're talking about, for example, more practical implications, yes, how, when, and how it can happen. So what could be the use case for that? Why I want to see other people like something, yes? So what is my purpose here? So maybe its purpose actually, again, something good. For example, I like this example. Once I discussed with one of a PhD students who is doing work in our laboratory about the things she's doing, and basically they try to find a better way to create a video conferences for work. So how people should be in this thing. And actually they came to a very funny idea. They came to the representation of the people as avatars, and they try to eliminate all these features of these avatars which show in, let's say, gender, for example. And we ask why? Well, because we have these statistics from the research that usually in normal conversations, by gender biases, by other things, women technically speak less than males. So if we wanted to really create more balanced approach, why not to take this clue out of the conversation and then just give the person be as a person, not be male or not being female, and maybe this works better. So in this use case, for example, we are basically trying to eliminate these features from the humans, for other humans. We're doing it for a greater good, theoretically speaking, for achieving some societal goals. In this case, for me, I'm still not comfortable with the situation, but I see it as something which can be justifiable as long as we can see the use case which supports some additional goals, some other ethical goals.
Just to follow up, if you don't mind, I think maybe the rules, maybe it stops. The permission is, I want to see sea monkeys. Okay, cool, that's funny. Studio Ghibli, fun. Cartoons, X-Men, great. I don't want to see any black people today. I don't want to see any gay people today. I don't want to see whatever your thing is. The increasing tribalism of our world is, enhanced with this kind of stuff. So maybe that's where the rule is. Yes, you can see the world, but you can't use it, and again, how do you decide? I don't know. But to be able to put your perspective on is just already where it causes harm, that's where I think it starts to cause harm.
My rule of thumb with this is that I think what's most likely to happen, it's probably more complicated than this, but it'll be something like what happens on the internet, what's happened on the internet over the last 30 years will start happening out on the street. And that means initially a Wild West, as you were saying earlier on, and that will have novel harms because it's a completely unregulated environment. But then it'll probably close down into more and more walled gardens that then are are subject to political forces downward on what forms of discourse, what form of seeing other people is acceptable, and what forms of seeing other people are not acceptable. And there will be extremes in absolutist societies where some ways of seeing the world perhaps are imposed. We've identified a lot of potential threats, and as I said, we really want to hear from everybody in the room, so we're going to throw it out in a minute. And in effect, I want to ask this question of the panel and then start the discussion here. And again, if you want to carry on with this discussion, this is why we're having this panel, to start these conversations more widely and to get people talking and to forge links so we can share knowledge about this stuff. Bottom line, what can we do about the risks that we've identified that we've all identified different risks and have different focuses in our different sectors. And in fact, I want to start with Anastasia because, working in heavy industry, you're likely to be the leading edge of where some policies get made because that's where the money is. So what can we do about the issues that we've raised?
Okay, so if taken, for example, this more industrial perspective, more technology-oriented perspective, let's say go into the very basic, very working around, because I can't say, for example, for all industry, I don't have that all experience. I have this a bit extreme things of high road machinery like snow groomers or excavators or things like that. So really heavy, very practical, very as far from digital technologies as you can imagine, basically, in many cases. So in this case, I think we just can follow really approach which exists in the industry now, based very heavily on the compliance to the certain regulations and very straightforward, very nicely detailed regulations explaining all the rules on these places. Because I think partly it came from the approach that the regulations on the workplace is quite oftenly just basically written by blood. So you need to know what you're doing because the other things, other ways you can do some things which can come with a very big risks for the people involved in that. So I think if we model in, for example, ethical requirements for these things and we try to somehow touch this approach in a project, we're trying to take it as this. So we're showing what are exactly the risks you can face in the end. That's why you can't do this way. So you need to apply certain practices. And again, it will be better if these practices, at least in this scenario, will be very much codified and very much covered by law, I think, probably the work law, not specifically higher level. But again, it depends on how again, I don't see there is a solution for everyone, for every practice, for every industry, for every way of approaching these technologies. It's very much context-based, and I think for industry, compliance would be probably the best way.
I'm just one person, and I can't influence a government, not like Alina. You guys are better at that. What I can do and what I encourage other people to do is in your own world, in your own interactions with clients, partners, friends, whatever, make sure to mention some of the more dystopian potentials because it does motivate me as well. Alina, it's not, I agree. For me, if it was all, I love XR, right? I make 3D art too. I mean, I've been doing it for years. Like, I love the potential. I love the creative potential. I love the immersion. I love the colors. I love everything. But, you can get carried away with the sky is fantastic, blue. And you can also, at the same time, say, but there's some negative potential. So when I talk to clients, they know they're going to get a dose of honesty from me. I am Dutch. That there's also some negatives. And I think you can only change, at least I, as one person and everybody here with your own interactions, you can potentially help influence in your own world by at least bringing up things when you're having discussions with people and make them aware, because I think a lot of people don't think about this. So that's, the very small mundane things, but that's it for me.
I mean, how we've done it, and coming back to your answer, when we developed the Universal Code of Conduct, actually, we had, I think, over half a year of a stakeholder review. So the first draft, we've actually been working and getting feedback from industry people to comment, are we missing something? Is there something wrong? Before we now publish the final version. So it's also working with the industry and also making sure that this is heard, because it's also important that you're not coming up with something that is not able to be then applied. It's just a matter that it's also being adopted and making it applicable. Otherwise, because when you're a creator, you constantly have this inner-outer conflict. And I think you are held accountable when you create something. And apparently, if you're working on X amount of projects, in real life, you usually don't have enough time to do the testing. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So, and I think we're just building the roots. The next generation will take over, but I want to leave good roots, stable roots, because it's not us who's living in that world.
Yeah, the issues we're raising are going to be dealt with by the younger generation, most likely, who grow up native to these technologies. And I think thinking about them is a good place to throw it out to, I mean, this is just, I'm an optimist, and I'm so excited to see so many people here. We've had these conversations at South by Southwest London this year. We've had them at other National XR Day. And I've seen so many people coming out of the woodwork, maybe using different terminology for their own work or different terminology for what we're talking about, but that's where we want to make connections now. So thank you for coming, because that's the start of something. Anya.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. I was wondering if we could pick two concepts that I've been thinking about. So passive versus active augmentation and consumption, and potentially top-down versus bottom-down risks. So what I mean by passive and active is we might talk about examples of users, whether large sort of oppressive powers like states or employers, right, or individual in the wild people doing things like tagging, stalking, doxing, all of these negative examples we've listed. So we might have like active risks from users, but the reality that we see now with the internet and social media is a lot about passive consumption. People are very happy with an algorithm recommending an endless stream of things that make you feel safe and happy and comfortable. And at the moment, since Meta and other large companies are sort of dominating the space, it seems likely that that would be replicated. You wouldn't immediately be seeing a Black Mirror-esque apocalypse outside. You'd be seeing something that is quite safe feeling for you. Which one of those, I guess, do you think is more of a pressing concern, potentially? And how do we decide? So if we're afraid both of a top-down actor like a state and a bottom-up actor like
I would even argue there. So we had various work packages, and one that feeded into the code of conduct was actually the ethic one. So I would really recommend you, because here we also came up with a topology of risks. So we actually came up with 6 major categories: epistemic risks, health risks, and even more. So it's also context-based. So based on what kind of use case or scenario you need to check. So even top down or bottom up, I think it's also being in a specific use case or specific industry, you have different sort of contexts. That's why we came up with this sort of 6 topology, and that's building up on doing a mapping of emerging risks starting from 2000 to 2023. So I think it's even more layered than top-down or bottom-up, to be honest. I think we also touched it in the workshop that we had in also with the good enough ethics as well, which is an amazing framework.
Yeah,
way I can
absolutely.
recommend.
Thank you. I'll check that out. I guess like the key of the question that I want to get to is if we have these different sorts of risks and we want to avoid both being oppressed from the top but also dangers coming up from the bottom, how do we actually decide what the safe middle is, something that still has free speech? Is that a democratic process? Do we as citizens of the augmented world get to decide this? I don't know, just an idea.
It's a good question. I think it's a good starting point to think about individual rights. That's why we structured this panel. Human rights.
That's why we have, I mean, at the core, you have the human rights,
Yeah.
period.
How do you defend between like unregulated anarchic forces and totalitarian forces? In theory, right, you have rights that, you know, give you certain inalienable things that don't or shouldn't happen to you, and this is how you navigate things. And I think that's why we structured this conversation. That's why, you know, I always come back to how we exercise rights over something that we don't necessarily have any control of. That, like, you know, what graphics are textured onto our physical surfaces. So ultimately, I think, you know, how do we find a middle ground is we find it in politics and in policy, because what's going to happen what makes the difference between the two areas that you're describing is politics. I think we need to face up to the idea that augmenting reality is a political thing to do. And I think without rights, you know, it being a political thing to do, we need a foundation of rights that are outside of politics.
Where can the audience find this code of conduct?
It's on Zenodo. I hope she's mentioning it in every of her presentations as well. But you find it, so our project is ended, but if you go to xrforhuman.eu, you actually find it now on the landing page because we just closed the project.
We have a Discord channel now, right? Why don't you just put it on there too?
Yeah. We'll put the link on after this. And that's XR for Human. That's the numeral 4, XR for Human, which highly recommended. And they are one of the bodies that are really breaking ground in this space, exactly.
6 minutes, okay. I will try to structure my question like to the best of my abilities. I'm not the best summarizing. I start again. So I have a question that has to do with opportunities versus risks and also growing up native, because I have a 9-year-old. So these questions are very relevant for the next generation. So I asked a friend once, like, how do I know if I need a psychologist or a psychiatrist? And he said, if you think you're a chicken, then you go to a psychologist. If you know you're a chicken, you go to a psychiatrist. Right? I mean, that was like the wisdom of that year. So considering that kids are a sponge and zip file of knowledge, right? I mean, their perception is also evolving, right? And every time I see an ad, for example, of these like Mario games, augmented reality, I immediately have to think of her, like what is the perception that she's going to have of the real world, of the physical reality, So my question is, what are your thoughts on the evolution of perception and our ability to spot disorders in a world with customized realities?
Yeah, I think I maybe can talk about it a bit, not specifically in the context of industrial XR, but in broader perspective, because what we were doing basically in my university, in my group, we try to understand what differs, create these new emergent technologies to these aspects of perception and manipulation. So for example, we now all know all these web interfaces, text interfaces, we all know it can create some deception or deceptive patterns. So sometimes companies try to take more of your money because presenting you things specific way. So, I mean, it's obvious for most of us now. But then we're going out of this desktop interfaces to the, for example, voice reality or voice modality for interactions. We can see that a lot of manipulative tactics, which will not work in a text, easily work in a voice. And we are now doing the studies showing that XR and VR, it's even worse because it's natural, it's just sort of fake your senses, and all these parameters of this reality is very easily customizable for a person who would like to really operate, let's say, these parameters of reality. So yes, it's a really great risk, but well, in some cases I'm slightly optimistic because again, the internet just, you see, even I, so because the internet just started and all this web interfaces was quite new things, it was easier to manipulate using this media. Now people know that things working like that, so we have the psychological defenses against these technologies. So I think partly problem will be less intense than the technology will be more abundant, so they all use it in everyday work and in everyday life in general. But on the other hand, I think, I mean, we have this discussion, all this, with all the generations, all the new technologies come into place, yes. I mean, then TV came, of course, oh my gosh, TV is just eating our brains and our kids will not understand reality anymore. So I think as long as we keep this emotional contact with our kids, with people we like, we're still on the safe ground.
Ultimately, we're talking about subjectivity, right? Like seeing the world in very different ways. And realize, the moment that a kid realizes that other people see the world in a different way to them, that's part of growing up and being able, that's a root of empathy. And again, that's something that I want to see these technologies stimulating because I'm a story guy and story is all about building empathy for the way that other people see the world and experience the world very differently to you. But I think, to your point, kids are already growing up in a world where what is real, or the idea that there is a single reality that we can all basically agree on, that idea is seeming increasingly quaint. And so I think we need to find ways to solidify the sense of being able to know what's real. And I think that's something that we can agree on, that we can maybe find a way to push for in technological developments inside glasses and headsets. That the baseline is that there should be an expectation that when you view the world through technology, it has a bit of a tag on it to remind you that what you're seeing isn't real, and so that you can see John's shaking his head. Yeah, we'll talk about this afterwards. Yeah, but how do you get this done, right? And even worse, like the idea that, oh no, let's leave it there. I don't know. Oh, but also, no, one final thing, because these guys have heard me do this before. We also need to have a baseline of understanding that that we can understand whether other people are not seeing the world the way that we are. And so we understand that there's a red light on glasses that have cameras in them that indicates that the camera is on. Perhaps we also need another light that indicates when that person is not viewing the same reality that you are.
Okay, we have 1 more minute for questions, and I know people really want to ask questions, so if you don't mind, you and then you.
Mine's just really, really quick. Alina, you mentioned good enough ethics. Is that from Professor Kathleen Richardson in ShareSpace? Oh, I'm so pleased to hear it's being used. I'm on the advisory board of it, so I'm like, yes.
We literally, and this is the other thing, what I think is really important, and I've been nagging, and especially being part in the advisory team for the new funding program after Horizon Europe, because it's literally, this was not initiated by the EU Commission, but proactively it's been 4 EU-funded projects that saw intersections, and we actually had a workshop together. And I think we need that more. Flexibility and interconnection between projects, because otherwise you have these sort of siloed projects where you have constant funding and you obviously see interconnections, so it could also be way more efficient.
Do you want to just mention what good enough ethics is for other people who are not aware?
So it was actually inspired, and I hope I'm not shaming Kathleen here, it was actually inspired by good enough parenting. And so they've been actually, and what I love about this framework and intersects actually really nicely that we conducted in the workshop with the code of conduct is they've been applying it now to different experiences actually in art and art media and media literacy as well. So actually applying it where, like, with good enough parenting is like, what is the bare minimum that you can agree on? So it's quite a nice project.
So last moments. Coming back to the idea of having one reality of your own. I'm going back to philosophy here. And for example, in the phenomenology school, they say that the way you recognize someone as a human is because they have a point of view, literally, through their eyes. And so that also means actually that basically reality is before VR, before convergence, before AI, before everything, it's already made up from everyone in every situation. And the way, this is why we say that sometimes it's difficult to communicate because our own realities are not interoperable. Yes, exactly. And there's a way to work on it that is putting together the 2 different views. In ancient Greek, it is sun, with, and ballo, that means pool, and the word is symbols. So are we going to become, or are we going to be back and being symbolic beings again? But maybe this is not the right moment. We have just like 10 seconds to answer this.
I mean, I think, that's a bad sign. I think that the best case scenario is that this technology helps make our different versions of reality more interoperable, more communicable, and that we find ways to walk a mile in other people's shoes and see how other people see the world. Let's close
That's
with,
what
like,
VR is so good for.
what we should do.
That's what VR is so great for.
That's what VR is so great for?
Yeah, I did a TED Talk on that, actually. Yeah.
Whoa, where can we find that? What's the title of a TED Talk?
It's been a couple of years.
Okay, well, we'll just search it on there.
I forget.
Well, this is a great discussion, and I encourage you to stick around to ask questions to the speakers afterwards, but let's give them a round of applause, please. Sorry, we gotta keep on time. I think 5:30 is now the time for the welcoming party. If you'd like to stick around, please do. But if you'd like to go to the party, please do. But this has been a great discussion. I appreciate
so much.
XR for
being
Human.
here.
I think I saw that come live yesterday, and it's beautiful.
We are ending. We are literally done. So
Congratulations.
I hope the legacy will be taken on, I hope.
Well, that's the start. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Thank you. Well,